皆さんよくいらっしゃいました。はい。はい。もうなしで。今日はですね、私が伝えている東京大学の科学研究費補助金というので、文部省からいただいている、文部科学省からいただいている研究費で、この研究会を開催させていただきました。で、本当、ひょんなご縁でですね、ソダジ先生に講演していただくことができるという機会が与えられましたので、本当に嬉しく思っています。もう仏教の教えの真髄と、それが私たち一人一人の人生を生きるということの関係、それをどうやって生きるかということの知恵をどう組み出すということについてお教え願いたいとよろしくお願いします。
Today, I am very honored and happy to have this opportunity with everyone to discuss the philosophy of Tibetan Buddhism. Among those present, some of you may be very interested in Tibetan Buddhism, while others may not care that much. But regardless, nowadays, there is what many people commonly call a Tibet fever, or more specifically, Tibetology fever. As a direct result, this significant trend has truly swept across the entire world. So I think it's necessary for us to take this short time to reflect a bit more deeply on the fundamental and profound ideas of Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, Tibetan Buddhism, when compared to both Theravada Buddhism as well as Northern Buddhism, which is also widely known as Chinese Buddhism, has distinct characteristics and a rich history. These three Buddhist traditions are called the three major systems of Buddhism. Many people may already know that Buddhism originated over 2,500 years ago, when the revered Sakya Muni Buddha first turned the Dharma wheel 3 times and then gradually flourished and expanded throughout India. Around 440 AD, the famous Nalanda Monastery was established in India, becoming one of the largest and most influential universities in the entire world. There was another significant Buddhist university in ancient India, known as the Vikramashila Monastery. These two esteemed universities are widely recognized as the cradles of Eastern culture. I believe that the Institute for East Asian Thought at the University of Tokyo is also very much aware of this significant fact. Indeed, Eastern Buddhist thought now profoundly influences the entire world, reaching far and wide. We can think of it in this way. Scientific thought originated in the West and gradually flourished as it spread eastward, whereas some ancient human philosophies and cultural ideas from the East have also had a certain influence on the West. The lineage of Nalanda Monastery in India, in fact, many professors today regarding the thoughts of scholars like Shantideva, Shantarakshita, and Padmasambhava, their various philosophies, especially the ideas of great masters like Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti. Many people are probably interested in hearing about these. As some professors just mentioned, originally, today, we wanted to hear about the ornament of the middle way. That is the philosophies of Shantarakshita, also known as Shantarakshita, but perhaps the Madhyamaka philosophy is too specialized. So not everyone may be able to fully understand it today. Therefore, today, we will give a relatively brief and general overview and talk about the entire philosophical system of Tibetan Buddhism. The lineage of Nalanda Monastery around the 8th century AD was transmitted to the Tibetan region of the Himalayas, that is, to Samye Monastery in Lhasa. Samye Monastery in Lhasa is known as the first monastery in Tibet, or as a school of Eastern culture. The entire lineage spanning from the 8th to the 10th century is commonly called the Old School, also widely known as the Nyingma tradition. and is a significant historical period. Now, there are many monasteries and Buddhist lineages in Tibet. Their main practices also include exoteric teachings such as Prajna Paramita, Buddhist logic, Madhyamaka, and so on. The most important tantric practice is Dzogchen, the Great Perfection. Then, from the 11th to the 13th century AD, other schools in Tibet basically began to emerge. For example, at the very beginning, the Venerable Atisha was a very famous Indian scholar who came to Tibet and began to establish the early Kadampa school. That is to say, he composed works such as The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, among others. Later, the new Kadampa, represented by Master Tsongkhapa, became known as the Gelug school. There is also the Sakya school in Tibet. Their main focus is on exoteric teachings such as Madhyamaka and Buddhist logic. Especially among the 5 great founders of the Sakya tradition, there was one called Sakya Pandita Konga Galton, authored the Treasury of Logic on Valid Cognition. This Treasury of Logic on Valid Cognition is a highly representative work in Buddhist or Tibetan Buddhist logic. The Sakya school also teaches the path and its fruit and other esoteric practices. These Buddhist teachings are extraordinary. There is also the world-renowned Milarepa. The lineage passed down from him, and Gampopa is known as the Kagyu school. Their main practices include Mahamudra and other such methods. There is also the Jonan school. The Jonan school is known for revealing to the world the Tathagata Buddha nature philosophy from the third turning of the Dharma wheel in Buddhism, mainly expounding on the ultimate meaning of the Kalachakra Tantra. These teachings today, around the 1960s and 70s, were not only practiced and taught in the valleys and monasteries of Tibet, where continuous practice and teaching took place, but more importantly, due to special historical reasons, Tibetan Buddhism has now flourished in India, as well as in Southeast Asia, Western countries, and all around the world, and is once again flourishing in different ways. I've been to many places and can feel this myself. Tibetan Buddhism today, in this society, can be said to be present in almost every level of society, with people practicing or learning about it in various ways. Originally, in Tibet, Tibetan Buddhism was practiced among ordinary people in the community, and also at the intellectual level, but more importantly, among the monks in the monasteries through teaching, debate, and composing treatises. They learned in this way. But now, Tibetan Buddhism can be found in many places with many Dharma assemblies and centers among the general public, including some yoga studios where people practice in various ways. There's also a segment within different social groups, such as entrepreneurs, associations, or other large companies, where people study within their own circles. More importantly, in many schools around the world today, for example, some people use it in psychological research. I have actually been to Australia before on a prior occasion, where some professors treat it as a field of psychology, studying it from the perspective of psychology. At schools like Columbia and Harvard, they focus on the practice aspects of Tibetan Buddhism, such as certain tantric practices, including some teachings on gender equality related to Tibetan Buddhism, which are also being researched. At the University of Colorado in the United States, some professors are also studying environmental protection in Tibet, combining it with Tibetan culture and Buddhist philosophy in their research. This time, when I visited some European countries, including the UK and France, at Oxford University in the UK, there are some professors who study certain aspects of Tibetan Buddhist thought, and they also conduct research from the perspective of meditation. Additionally, some of them use Tibetan literature, including the unique and distinctive stylistic approaches and inherent characteristics of certain Buddhist texts, to conduct research in the field of literature. In short, perhaps you could look into it. Many research institutions at universities all around the world are actively approaching this from many different scientific fields, and their focus on Tibetan Buddhism varies. It is a multifaceted attention. Each time they focus on it, they treat it as a significant reference or a primary subject for their extensive research and scholarly discussion. As a dedicated Tibetan studies scholar myself, I can attest to its importance. I think I can put it this way. Having studied and researched this field for many years, my view is that many scientists from various schools are very interested in this field.
In fact, the study of Tibetan Buddhism, if we truly use meticulous and sharp wisdom to carefully delve into it, we can also uncover some of the most refined and profound thoughts of humanity from it. Of course, if we do not properly grasp the deepest meanings and only understand it on the surface, we may not be able to obtain its most profound significance. I've noticed that some of the older professors at certain schools in the past also held many deep-seated prejudices and significantly differing views toward Tibetan Buddhism, including some of the older, more traditional professors at your esteemed school here, who have written some articles in the past, which I have also read. They mentioned that within Tibetan Buddhism, there is a figure called Longchenpa Rinpoche. But some of Longchenpa's highest thoughts on equality were taken completely out of their original context by them, saying that Longchenpa did not truly adhere to the fundamental Buddhist principle of karma across the three distinct times, because in the ultimate highest state there is neither inherent good nor inherent evil. They have also made some comments from this perspective. Of course, we are also very willing to accept some comments and constructive feedback, because in places like yours, where there is indeed a strong emphasis on freedom of speech, if there really are some unreasonable or problematic aspects within the practices of Buddhism, then it is important to address them. Or if there are some unreasonable aspects in Tibetan Buddhism, you can speak up about them directly and quite frankly and openly. The other party will definitely be able to accept it. But if someone criticizes without truly understanding the deeper philosophical foundations and cultural context, I'm genuinely afraid that approach is not very reasonable or fair. For example, Longchenpa Rinpoche, he authored an extremely large number of scholarly treatises. He is exceptionally renowned in Tibet, and in all of his works, including principles such as karma, the cycle of rebirth, good deeds bringing good results, and bad deeds bringing bad results, there are people who may have never read them at all. So, if someone has just never really ever read them, and then criticizes by taking a sentence or two out of context, that is truly quite laughable and rather amusing. Of course, these historical things happened a considerable long time ago. And in various different places across the world, there have always been some persistent misunderstandings and misinterpretations about Tibetan Buddhism. Nowadays, this includes some young professors I personally know and interact with regularly. Perhaps because of the pervasive information age, they have gained a much deeper understanding of both Tibetan culture and world culture. People now possess a more open and expansive mindset. So I'm afraid their insightful analysis of many issues is more rigorous and quite detailed. As for Tibetan Buddhism, in many significant respects, it is very much willing to openly accept debate. You may also know that from a very young age, when it comes to certain fundamental principles, they engage in extremely sharp debates with each other in the monasteries. If the opposing side has no truly valid reason, then such a claim simply does not stand. But if there is a reason, even if it was said by the Buddha, we can still refute it. Therefore, in academic circles, it is sometimes quite inevitable that some individuals might feel that Tibetan Buddhism is not in accordance with the true Dharma or is entirely unreasonable. You can personally visit some of the many monasteries in Tibetan regions and engage in a direct debate face-to-face with the esteemed Geshes and Khenpos in Tibet. I think this is very important and a valuable experience. Because now is the information age, you can certainly bring along a video camera and a voice recorder at that particular time. Who is actually reasonable and who is not can be clearly seen on the spot, and people from all over the world can easily find out. As a Tibetan Buddhist myself, I have absolutely no unreasonable intention of defending it. I have no such thought. But I do have the profound responsibility and the clear intention that if it is a pure and authentic Dharma, people should truly understand it in a positive and constructive way. It absolutely shouldn't be misunderstood or tainted in any manner. Because of other reasons. Of course, I'm just not saying that, however, that all Tibetan Buddhists are perfect. I wouldn't dare to say that. But I truly believe that the Buddhist teachings themselves are indeed truly perfect. For people living in the 21st century, it is also a wonderful and effective remedy for the mind, truly, truly beneficial and profoundly helpful. Of course, among those who study Tibetan Buddhism, whether they are Tibetans or people from other ethnic groups, some may study it very well in accordance with the teachings and the Dharma, while some individuals wear the Dharma hats of Tibetan Buddhism or act in its name and may even engage in various kinds of illegal activities. Actually, many years ago in Japan, there were some sects that were not even genuinely Tibetan Buddhism at all, but they deceptively used the revered name of Tibetan Buddhism or extensively borrowed from its practices, and tragically, they also harmed many innocent lives or committed truly unimaginable and egregious wrongdoings. However, many people do not understand Tibetan Buddhism. If one truly understands Tibetan Buddhism, then whether these things are part of its teachings or not would be immediately clear. But I think many people here may not have gained a really deep, even particularly deep understanding of the most essential ideas of Tibetan Buddhism. This is not only the case in the present moment, but it has also been true throughout history, as many individuals, in fact, tend to take and embrace certain specific and fundamental aspects of the profound teachings of Buddhism, and truly regard them as the very core of Tibetan Buddhism. This is a mistake. If we truly possess the very soul of Buddhism, the authentic and profound Buddhist thought, then its rituals, its architecture, its ceremonies, these are truly necessary. But if its soul is missing, then the grand rituals, the grand buildings, or other forms will ultimately be meaningless, are actually just superficial. I've noticed that nowadays, for example, some people have great and truly profound faith in highly Tibetan Buddhist lamas and become their loyal and dedicated followers as well, spending all day obsessed with them, deeply infatuated, always in front of the lama, but have no understanding whatsoever of Buddhist philosophy. Such people are not necessarily true Tibetan Buddhists. And there are some people who may contribute to Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, making generous and abundant offerings to the temple and engaging in large-scale charitable activities and philanthropy. But in reality, this is simply doing good deeds. Are they truly Tibetan Buddhists? Not necessarily either. Because they have only understood a part of it, they can be accurately called a benefactor or a generous donor to it. If these donors never truly practice or deeply understand the Dharma at all, can they really be considered authentic Tibetan Buddhists? That's quite hard to definitively say as well. They are merely financial investors or dedicated supporters of it. Some people treat Tibetan Buddhism as a kind of very special and quite unique trend, wearing several prayer beads around their necks, sometimes even 10 strands of beads. They also wear Gao amulet boxes around their necks and many other things. They think that makes them Tibetan Buddhists. But in reality, that's not necessarily the case either. Anyone can really put on an act if they want to. Anyone can just hang a few strands of prayer beads around their neck. Wearing even 2 strands of prayer beads doesn't necessarily make someone a Tibetan Buddhist either. Some people journey to Tibet and capture many, many photos. They ride sturdy horses and herd yaks themselves, experiencing a part of the local life. They eat traditional tsampa and drink warm butter tea while in Tibet. They sing authentic Tibetan songs, perform traditional Tibetan dances, and wear colorful Tibetan clothes, fully immersing themselves in the culture. They think that makes them Tibetan Buddhists. But that's not necessarily true either, because they don't actually have any understanding of Tibetan Buddhist teachings inside. Some so-called experts, some scholars, they've only read merely 1 or 2 superficial books about Tibetan Buddhism. They genuinely think that makes them profound scholars of Tibetan Buddhism. But in actual fact, being a truly so-called scholar, strictly speaking, isn't that easy at all. It requires extensive study and deep understanding. If they've only read 2 books, that can't possibly cover all of Tibetan culture and Tibetan Buddhism. So who is a true practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism? In fact, Tibetan Buddhism is a very profound and intricate spiritual tradition. Let me put it this way. I truly admire the way you in Japan approach scientific research and development efforts. You have a very rigorous mindset and a particularly focused attitude. I believe that the true teachings of Tibetan Buddhism also have a very focused way of thinking. For a long time, it emphasizes first studying and learning, and then reflecting on it. After reflecting, then one proceeds to practice. Only such individuals truly possess the profound mindset of Tibetan Buddhism. This unique Tibetan Buddhist way of thinking is now genuinely being applied in their daily lives. And there are many people who live incredibly happy and fulfilling lives because of this profound spiritual approach. There are actually quite a lot of such people. Among the various levels of society that I have encountered, many people have cultivated Bodhicitta through Tibetan Buddhist practice and have developed the wisdom of selflessness through practice. And in the end, they truly live very happy lives in this world. There are quite a significant number of such individuals. Some of them are well-known celebrities, popular singers, and highly accomplished athletes who are prominent figures in the entertainment industry today. And then there are others as well, such as high-ranking officials in the political sphere of various countries around the world. On the surface, they may not make it very obvious that they are practicing Tibetan Buddhism, but in reality, through the widespread dissemination of information online, they are genuinely practicing. In the end, they have truly attained profound happiness in their lives. Recently, when I was in Japan, I had the opportunity to meet several professors from various universities who, after many years of genuine and dedicated study, have found their lives gradually becoming extremely relaxed and effortlessly natural. Japan, as we widely know, unfortunately has one of the highest suicide rates in the entire world and is consequently a country that is very tense and incredibly densely populated. However, some people, especially those who study Mahayana Buddhism, are able to face life in a particularly relaxed way. There are quite a few such people. What I truly want to share with everyone gathered here today, on the one hand, is that I sincerely hope that through various effective means, you can gain a truly positive and comprehensive understanding of Tibetan Buddhism. On the other hand, if you are interested and spend some time to truly study and practice, this may indeed bring about significant changes in your life, because there are currently many misunderstandings about Tibetan Buddhism, and these misunderstandings are actually caused by very few individuals. Some of them are truly extremely simplistic indeed. But if you don't study, these misconceptions may remain in your mind for a long time. For example, some people think that Tibetan Buddhism is just Lamaism and claim that it was created by a few individual lamas in Tibet. This is actually quite strange. Some think Chinese Buddhism is monk religion, created by 1 or 2 individual monks. But that's not the case at all, in fact. Anyone with historical knowledge can clearly see how Buddhism was transmitted from its origins in India to China, and how it was subsequently transmitted to Tibet. Japanese Buddhism also has its own historical stages and development process. Anyone who understands history will grasp the significance of this. Some people also actually believe Tibetan Buddhism is esoteric Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism is exoteric Buddhism. This statement is a very great mistake. In all the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism over more than 1,300 years, both exoteric and esoteric traditions have been fully integrated. Tibetan Buddhism can encompass Theravada Buddhism from places like Sri Lanka, and it can also include Chinese Buddhism. This is not just my own opinion. You can truly research it yourselves further in the future at your convenience. If you open up any of the current textbooks, it becomes immediately clear. Previously, I spent about 5 years currently translating a book called A History of Tibetan Buddhism, also known as A History of the Tibetan Esoteric Buddhism. This profound book was meticulously written by the esteemed Dudjom Rinpoche and contains well over 300,000 characters. It also extensively discusses much of the authentic and true history of Tibetan Buddhism. This has been published by Tibet Publishing House. I sincerely hope that many of you, whether dedicated scholars or devout lay practitioners, should try to understand things from a positive perspective. Otherwise, there is a story in Buddhism from the past which is exactly the same as this. Perhaps after a certain point in one's life, it becomes very difficult to truly change one's ingrained habits. In the past, there was a story in Buddhism that goes something like this. There was a merchant whose entire house was destroyed by a fire. Later, he eventually found a human skeleton among the ancient ruins after a thorough search. He believed it was his son's skeleton and felt deep sorrow. He then carefully put the ashes into a small pouch and carried it with him every single day. But in fact, his beloved son had indeed survived and was not dead. Later, when his son eventually returned, because he was in such deep pain at the time, he stubbornly believed that his son had died. So when his son came back, he refused to acknowledge him. He said, "My son is already in my pocket," and that he was indeed carrying him along with him. On the surface, this seems very foolish, but we humans also have this kind of problem. Once you are influenced by some unreasonable views and your way of thinking becomes fixed, it can be quite challenging to alter. It becomes very difficult to change. So, no matter where we are in our lives, people truly need to cultivate a positive mindset and develop their own logical approach. With these essential qualities, everything you do will be accompanied by profound wisdom. When you make choices with wisdom, everything you do becomes very reasonable. If you are accompanied by wisdom, including your profound faith and your boundless compassion, they all become incredibly meaningful and significant. If you truly lack wisdom, then your unwavering faith in a certain religion or spiritual path, in fact, faith without wisdom is called superstition. That's what I often think. Actually, faith in Buddhism should be significantly different from the faith found in some other religions. This is because in many other religions, as long as you have complete and utter faith in that particular religion, you don't necessarily need a lot of theories to explain it to you. But in Buddhism, if your profound wisdom can truly keep up, then you can indeed have unwavering faith in its teachings. If you find something unreasonable, you are completely free to abandon it, to reject and refute it. This is the distinctive and profound feature of wisdom within our faith. In one of Shakyamuni Buddha's revered sutras, it is also explicitly stated, "You should not think that just because I am the Buddha, you must have unwavering faith in me or show me absolute reverence." Just like refining gold, you should examine it over and over again. If you find it to be quite reasonable, then you can certainly accept it. If it is not reasonable, you are completely free to let it go. Do not think that just because I am the Buddha or your teacher, you should accept things in that way. When you choose to accept something, you must use your own wisdom to make a decision. So I think for all of you who are here, especially when you approach various things with your particular way of thinking, and diligently study the profound Tibetan Buddhist traditions of logic and the philosophical school of Madhyamaka, you should most certainly be able to gain a truly great deal from it indeed. That is what I personally believe. Because it employs a very sharp wisdom, allowing us to observe both the expansive macro world and the intricate micro world, as well as many profound aspects of the mind and its various phenomena. In the end, you truly convince others through reason. In this regard, I think it is very necessary for you to study it. If you do not study any knowledge and simply repeat what others say, you will not gain any real understanding. I have another perspective as well. Every religion talks about compassion and love. But why does Buddhism particularly emphasize compassion? For example, why should I be compassionate toward any and every sentient being? Because this being inherently enjoys happiness and intensely dislikes suffering and seeks to avoid it. So they are exactly the same as me. It is based on this reasoning that I should love them. It is not that we love them for no reason at all. Why should I love animals? The reason to love animals is that they are just like me. They possess a very precious life. So in Buddhism, there is a great deal of love and compassion. If we are to truly talk about love, we must also discuss the inherent wisdom behind it. Moreover, this so-called love for other sentient beings, or even for my enemies. Why exactly should I love my enemies? Because driven by my own afflictions, I might be capable of doing anything. Therefore, the same applies to enemies. When they are not in control, lacking freedom, and are driven by afflictions, they may have made mistakes or harmed me. So for certain reasons, it is entirely acceptable for me to truly love my enemies as well, indeed. Therefore, from the perspective of logical reasoning and profound wisdom, when we use wisdom to guide love and compassion, when we use wisdom to guide our faith, we may indeed differ in some significant respects from many other religions and other schools of Buddhism, perhaps in certain aspects. I sincerely hope that you will take the time to reflect on this matter. I believe that Japan stands apart from many other countries, primarily because within this unique nation, nearly every individual grows up with some inherent form of spiritual or cultural faith instilled in them from a very young age. Furthermore, they also tend to develop certain distinct views, understandings concerning the principles and practices of Buddhism, compared to places where there is absolutely no faith at all whatsoever. There is a definite difference. So everyone present here already possesses very good conditions and significant advantages. Although I'm not particularly familiar with the Japanese daily life, I do notice there are quite a few so-called Zen Buddhist elements and imagery present, whether it's in their painting traditions, when listening to music, or even in people's everyday speech patterns and behavior. There is a profound and unfathomable meaning, which naturally manifests itself. In such circumstances, people are often more likely to readily accept traditional ideas and established concepts. If there were no traditional ideas, it would indeed be extremely painful for us in today's highly competitive modern society. It would be very painful indeed. I've heard that in Japan, many ordinary people are quite religious. Some individuals may be baptized as Christians at birth and then have Buddhist ceremonies performed when they eventually pass away. There are many profound religious meanings involved as well, but there is something significantly lacking, perhaps in terms of theoretical understanding, as most people haven't really engaged in extensive long-term study or formal education in this particular area. This is rather regrettable indeed. I've asked some people before, of course they can't represent all Japanese people, but among the people I asked, do you believe in Buddhism? And they said they do. Then I asked, why do you believe? Which scriptures have you studied? They replied, I haven't studied any. It's just that I've had some family influence in this area since I was young. Actually, this particular kind of thinking is not sufficient. This was also the case in Thailand at first indeed, but later on, and now in Thailand as well, much of Buddhism has become just a mere formality, lacking its true essence. Personally, I feel that whether you are a devoted layperson or a dedicated monastic, if you are a Buddhist, you must truly understand the fundamental basic teachings of Buddhism. If you don't even understand the very basic teachings, then many of the external forms are optional. Having them or not doesn't really matter. There is a scripture in Buddhism called the Vimalakirti Sutra. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, it says, I wish to attain the joy of the Dharma, not the pleasures of the mundane world. What this means is, I want to experience the true peace and happiness that come from the compassion and wisdom of the Buddha's teachings, rather than seeking the material, superficial, and outward pleasures of the world. So, whether we are practicing Buddhists or people from other diverse walks of life, the most important thing is to truly grasp the essence of its profound philosophy. Of course, I also know that much of Japanese culture originated from China. However, when it comes to certain aspects of traditional culture in China, including proper etiquette, profound respect for parents, and genuine respect for others, perhaps China hasn't preserved these valuable principles as well as it truly could have. In Japan, these are demonstrated well. The etiquette between people is outstanding. This is true in Buddhism. Aspects not well preserved in parts of China have been maintained well in Japan for hundreds and thousands of years. I truly rejoice in this. This time, I have just come from visiting several countries in Europe, as well as the continent of Africa. In some of those particular countries, people there possess an extremely strong and deeply ingrained sense of self-esteem. They are unable to show respect to others. When I suddenly arrived in Japan, the etiquette in Japan, compared to the self-centeredness and a pronounced sense of superiority often observed in some Western European countries, these two distinct cultures, I almost didn't even know which particular mindset I should genuinely accept. But personally, in principle, I especially appreciate the fundamental idea that people should learn certain essential rules and guidelines from a very young age. When there was an earthquake in Japan in the past, we saw on TV that even in such a severe critical moment, everyone still lined up orderly and behaved very politely indeed. In short, today isn't really a formal structured speech. I'm just casually sharing my personal thoughts with everyone. If there's anything reasonable in what I've said, please feel free to accept it. If there's anything unreasonable, you are welcome to criticize or correct me. Thank you very much.